Thank you. My parents met in the Dominican Republic with my father, the neighborhood photographer, asking my mother if he can take her photo. She declined. But in my father's typical fashion, he snapped this candid of her, a then 22-year-old woman. They would marry a year later and eventually move to New Orleans, Louisiana with their 4 children. My father is the first photographer I ever knew. He documented our family, and he introduced me to the camera. All the photographs I've come to cherish came from my father's 35mm Minolta. I inherited photography from my dad, and I have since been documenting my family for nearly 2 decades. I've captured my siblings, my nieces and nephews, birthdays, weddings, and even my father's battle with Alzheimer's. The camera not only acts as a tool for reflection, but has been my primary means of documenting myself and my family. My relationship to photography centers on my relationship to those around me. It is the primary marker of where I am in my life and who is occupying that life with me. For the past 10 years, I've taken a self-portrait of myself on my birthday. This is an opportunity for me to self-reflect, to bear witness to my personal growth, to see myself from the outside in. Each portrait reveals a woman a little older and wiser than the year before, with straight hair or an afro, sometimes strong, sometimes not. This past year, I decided to invite my mother into my self-portrait. For most of my life, my relationship to my mother has been complicated. We very rarely got along. For that very reason, I rejected our resemblance. My mother grew up under a dictatorship in a land ridden with poverty and distress. I did not. I came of age in a democracy, in a land where I am free to do whatever it is that my heart desires. My mother only completed the 9th grade. I've gone on to graduate from the Ivy League. The way we see the world is quite different. In fact, our worlds couldn't be more worlds apart. My relationship to my mother has been a great source of pain for me. I never talked about it for fear of being seen as an ungrateful daughter. It's taboo to have these types of relationships, the kind where we don't see eye to eye, particularly as women of color. In society, Black women are not able to have dimension, much less complicated relationships to their family. Me inviting my mother into my portrait was my attempt at a visual dialogue, one that could transgress a verbal one. Placing our portraits side by side, I realized how much I actually resembled my mother. For the first time in my life, I saw myself in her, the shapes of our noses, our thick eyebrows, the ways in which we were a pain behind our eyes. It was all there. I also saw the woman ahead of me, imaginably fully realized, with a family of her own, existing in a world that she designed herself. All the parts of myself were in that photograph, as well as traits, traumas that didn't. I began asking other women of color about their relationships to their mother, and I learned I wasn't alone in my experience. Despite the similarities, I discovered how vastly different and diverse this mother-daughter relationship is, considering class, sexual preference, nationality. Unfortunately, despite the long and illustrious series of conversations around photography, there's a lack of research when it comes to rendering and reading the image of Black women. So I decided to invite them into my studio, both mothers and daughters, in hopes to create space for a conversation that is oftentimes difficult to enter. Our sessions usually begin as conversations. I speak with each woman separately, asking mothers to tell me about their daughters, and daughters to share with me things about their mothers. More times than not, the way that they describe one another is vastly different. For some mothers, they revere their daughters for being strong, bold, courageous women, while others see their daughters as an embarrassment, extremely different from themselves. Some daughters, their mothers are their best friend, while others feel threatened, tormented, and envied by theirs. Following our correspondence, I asked that they wear something similar, a blouse, a hair clip, a lip, and I usually pick out a backdrop, usually floral. Ancient Egyptians were known to be the first florists. They would pick stylized designs of roses, poppies, jasmine for things such as temple offerings, banquets, and processions. To them, flowers were symbols of majesty, royalty, and beauty. In contemporary society, Black women are often seen as less than, as not measuring up to the perception of what is conceived as beautiful. My studio is a space where, for just one moment, I can change the narrative. The use of florals connects my subjects to a regal past, one where they are at the center. Often, these sessions are the first time that they're being captured together in a way that honors their mother-daughter relationship, despite how furious, joyous, or complicated that relationship is. These photographs examine what it means to be a Black woman, a Black mother, and a Black daughter. Side by side, these images tell the story of two women who are markedly different, but incredibly close, of two faces that couldn't be more alike, but two women who couldn't be more apart, of generations of laugh lines or decades of similar pain. These photographs discuss what it means to be women with complicated narratives around themselves and their relationships to one another. I'm reminded of a story about one of my sitters recounting the embarrassment her mother felt after discovering that she was gay. She shared with me that our portrait session was a pivotal moment in their relationship because not too long ago, her mother refused to be in the same photograph with her. Photography unlocks the door to a deeper conversation. It provides the subjects with a deep level of intimacy, a visual storytelling, one that is direct and undeniable. The resistance between how we see ourselves and how others see us is an ongoing struggle. Photography creates intimacy between the camera and the subject, between the subject and him or herself. Placing my mother's photograph next to my own allows me to understand her. It provides a way for me to know her that makes it possible to love her despite her limitations. That photograph allows me to see the woman and the human in her. Photography can do that. It can create pathways to healing and reconciliation. Families are complicated. Motherhood is complicated. Being a daughter is complicated. And these things are complicated even more by family dynamics, culture, time. But images have no boundaries or barriers. They tell us stories. They transport us to times of joy and moments of laughter. They convey the anguish of daughters coming to terms with their far from perfect relationships with their mothers. Images are proof that we're here. Now, we all can say that photography is the truth teller and the best liar at the same time. We see this every time we open our Instagram feeds, right? We are creatures who are interested in all that is around us. We find interest in what we do and what we wear and what we eat and where we go. But what about the interior? If you were to look at photographs of yourself through the years, what would it say about you, about your family? Do your portraits relay a familiar face? Whose face is it? What is your relationship like with that person? Are we holding on to the facade that our lives are perfect, or that our relationships to the people around us are void of complexity? There is something incredibly transformative about truth-telling. However ugly, however beautiful, it can provide a pathway to liberation. I encourage you to pick up a camera and interrogate what it means to look like someone you don't understand. Because maybe, just maybe, you will find yourself closer to who you are. Thank you.